Hey everyone, we'll get started very shortly. We'll just allow another minute or so for everybody to join. Anu, can you hear me? You're online. How are you doing today though? You well?
Very good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Cool. Well, we might get started. The floor is yours, Anu.
So thank you to everyone for joining us today. My name is Anu Stevens and I'm part of the team at the University of Wollongong's Career Central. I'm speaking to you from the beautiful lands of the Wadi Wadi people of the Dharawal Nation, and I pay my respects to the elders past and present. It would be wonderful to hear where you're joining us from and the traditional lands on which you stand. So if you would like to, please feel free to add that into the chat. In my role at Career Central, my position actually works across both industry partners, and I also get to work with the really talented students that are coming through the ranks. So they're graduating into a market that we haven't seen before. So there's more jobs than ever and students have more options. And the market is slowly responding, but there is one key area that's been a bit slower to react to the tightening conditions. And many organisations are still reluctant to take on international students. This, in my opinion, is probably one of the biggest missed opportunities to find really great talent, diversify your workforce, and to take advantage of a group of students that have a wonderful, varied work experience. And this is the reason that I reached out to Grant at Prosple, because we wanted to share with you the ins and the outs on how recruiting international students can enhance your competitive advantage, as well as give you the practicalities on how it all works. So we're going to be bringing in our expert immigration lawyer, Imran Khan. But for now, please welcome our host, Grant from Prosple.
Thanks, Anu. Well said. And I'm joining from Larrakia land up here in very beautiful and hot and humid Darwin. So, but yeah, lovely to obviously be here today and be hosting the session alongside Anu. We've got a bit of a jam-packed agenda, so we should dive into it. As I said, we've got Imran, who's an immigration lawyer, who'll be having a bit of a Q&A and chat with Anu in a moment. And we've also got an employer panel as well coming up, which is really exciting. So we've got Steve from GHC, Simon from APM Group, and Sonali as well from Tata Consultancy Services dialing in. So it'll be a little bit later, but as I said, in the meantime, I know it's a great suggestion. Feel free to pop your where you're dialing in from as well into the chat. We always like a webinar that's a little bit engaging and stuff, and where the chat's going off. So feel free to dive in. So a little bit of a market context and update, and I know you very succinctly put it just then. We've never seen a market like this before, at least in the last sort of 15 to 20 years here in Australia, which is a long time before I entered the graduate recruitment space. In terms of the dynamics, we've never seen as many employers hiring graduates in Australia, at least over the last 5 to 10 years. So you can see the number of AEG members, and for those who are not familiar with AEG, that's the Australian Association of Graduate Employers, and you can see their member numbers have increased year on year over the past 5 or 6 years. On top of that, the team here at Prosple, we do an annual top 100 graduate employers ranking every year to rank the best graduate employers across Australia. And in 2021, we had 572 employers nominate for that list, or be nominated for that list, I should say. And this year, so earlier this year in February, when we ran that top 100 list, it was 796. So a 32% increase in employers year on year. And that's very much in line with those stats from AEG. So on top of that, and we would have all seen this, there's more employers in the market, but we're all hiring more graduates as well. So when we talk about the war for talent, it's really on, and there's been a real big surge in the number of opportunities and graduate vacancies that are closing month on month. So you can see on the chart on the right-hand side of the screen, these are the graduate vacancies by closing month on the Prosple site. So that includes Grad Australia and all of our other Australian job boards that we power. And you can see in the light blue line is 2022. So that's far superseding. It's more than, it's a 50% increase year on year in most months compared with 2021 numbers. On top of that, there's fewer graduates. So we're relying on DESI, so the Department of Education Skills and employment to release this data for last year, for 2021. But based on 2020 numbers, you can see that there's actually been a bit of a plateau in the number of students actually enrolling completing their courses at Australian universities. And you can see that overseas students dropped off just slightly as well in 2020. And like I just touched on, there's less students enrolling in university. I think that this is interesting. There's quite a big drop off in 2020, and there will be obviously in 2021 as well due to COVID impact. However, I was reading an article in the AFR this morning which spoke about that it looks like there's been an increase in students, international students looking to actually study in Australia for next year. So 11% above pre-pandemic numbers. So that's really interesting. And so hopefully that curve starts going up, which will help all of you online and make your lives a little bit easier as well, because there'll be more candidates in the market. But that's to give you just a quick snapshot and summary as to where we're at. And I guess the question is, and I know you touched on this, where does that leave us today? And that's why we're online today. We really believe that there's a fantastic opportunity for employers to start opening up their doors to international students. We'll hear from some leading employers that are doing that already and doing it really successfully. But next up, I'll actually pass across to Anu. Actually, sorry, we've got a poll. So we're interested in hearing whether your organisation actually hires international students. So that should be live now. So really curious just to do a quick temperature check of the room and who we're speaking to online as to whether you do indeed actually hire international students at the moment. Just in your experience, Anu, out of every 100 or so employers you speak with, how many do hire international students?
That's a really good question. And I think it depends on how big the organisation is. It tends to be, if you're a big multinational organisation, they're quite open to it. And smaller organisations are really quite open to it. It tends to be that sort of mid-range that really have the policies and procedures to rule them out before they've considered it. Whereas a lot of the international students we see coming through, especially in careers advice, we try to tell them, look, go for the smaller organisations. They're the ones who tend to be more supportive and see the value in that as well.
Yeah, interesting. So I might end the poll there and we can see, if I click share results, it'll be handy. So it's kind of a 50-50 split. So 40% of you are hiring international students, which is great to see. 47% not yet, hopefully, or not at the moment. And there's 13% undecided. Cool. Anu, I might pass the mic to you to introduce Imran. Or Imran, are you? Yeah, there you are. You're online.
Imran, I think you're probably the best person to introduce yourself. Do you want to sort of take through where your experience lies and what specialty services that you offer?
Yeah, happy to do that, Anu. So I've been practicing as a solicitor in New South Wales since 2005. Started my own practice in 2015 and still operating that practice now under the name of Khan Legal. I was a former migration agent up until deregulation in 2021. So some people may have heard the term migration agent and wondering how does that differ to a lawyer? Before 2021, even though we'd done studies at uni and became solicitors, we had to obtain separate registration to provide visa advice as a migration agent. So a lot of strong lobbying from legal groups saw the end of that law. So in 2021, lawyers no longer had to register as migration agents. So we can now provide immigration advice without getting a separate registration. So that's the difference between a solicitor and a migration agent. In my practice, I do all areas of law with a focus on compensation and immigration matters. So I'm also an immigration pro bono solicitor for the Illawarra Legal Centre here in Wollongong. So I'm based in Wollongong, same area as Anu, and I advise clients on all immigration and visa matters, acting for applicants and employers for sponsored visas, etc. as well. So yeah, the whole host of things.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll get straight into it. So for those of you who aren't aware of how the immigration system works in Australia, basically you've got to have some type of visa or be an Australian citizen to have the right to enter or remain in Australia. So within the visa types, you've got two different categories or classes of visa. So you've got your temporary resident, which means that you've got a certain fixed period of time that you can remain in Australia. And before that visa expires, you've either got to renew it or get a new visa or leave the country. And then from there you go to permanent residency, which allows you to remain indefinitely in Australia. And from there you can then transition to citizen if you like, which gives you the added benefit of having that Australian passport. So that's the different categories of visas. If you want to go to the next slide, Anu. So once you've understood the different types of visas, there's a number of different categories of visas within the temporary and permanent visas that would be applicable to students. So many of these employers here would be looking to hire students, and then students coming through, when they're applying for jobs, most people would probably still be on a student visa, but they'd be looking to transition to one of the temporary visas, or even if they're lucky, a permanent visa before they start working. So even if a student is still on a student visa when they're going through the hiring process, doesn't mean an employer can't hire them, because most students within Australia will be eligible for a 485, which is the temporary graduate visa. Now that's a visa that's been introduced by the government here to try and make Australian students to come and study here from overseas. So it enables students ordinarily to stay for 2 years, and in that 2-year period they have unlimited work rights, so they can work wherever they want for any employer without any restrictions. And then depending on the type of degree or studies that they've completed, they can also get a longer visa. So master's students get a 3-year visa and PhD graduates get a 4-year visa. And then Hong Kong visa holders or passport holders normally would get a 5-year visa. And Grant was just mentioning before, there's been some discussion in the media about the government even looking to extend these visas for graduates, so from the minimum 2-year to a 3 or 4-year visa as well. So most employers, if you're hiring an international student, it's safe to say that unless something sort of extraordinary comes out, the student will most likely be in Australia for at least 2 years and possibly longer on this temporary graduate visa. And then transitioning from the 485, sorry I'm talking about all these numbers, but most visas refer to by their number as opposed to the name. It's just easier and common among people who handle visas just to refer to numbers, and a lot of students will also know the number terminology as well. So you'll get to know that as you deal more and more with visas, the common numbers for the visa type. So your 485 is a temporary graduate visa. Once students are on the 485 visa, ordinarily their aim of the game is to try and get to some sort of permanent visa. So from a 485, if they get to a permanent visa, then they can remain indefinitely in Australia and work and live here without any restrictions. And again, there's no issues for an employer to hire someone like that. So if the student did not get the sufficient qualifications or skills or the necessary criteria to get a permanent visa, they can still remain in Australia and transition to one of the other types of temporary visas, such as a 482, which is an employer-sponsored visa, or there's even specific visas for regional employers and people looking to live and work in a regional area. And the government's trying to make regional areas more competitive and more attractive for students and people to live and work. So if any employers have got offices in regional areas, and that might be useful to use as a marketing ploy to try and attract students and other people to work in those areas, because it can become an easier pathway for a student to get to a permanent residency visa if they're living and working in a regional area. So for employers, there shouldn't be an issue hiring students on the 485, and then student will be able to live and work here and continue their study if they want to, continue their working here. And then from a 485, then you've got some permanent visas. So we've got a 189 or 190. So that visa system, it's a bit like a points system and a bit like a job offer, where students or visa applicants would sort of put an application in, or what's called an expression of interest on the government websites. And then every month the government goes through all those applications and will pick the top certain number of graduates or applicants that are on that list. and will then go and offer them visas to become permanent residents. So the criteria for that, things like work experience, studies, whether they've English language skills. So the students, most applicants will want to try and get as much experience as possible, because then they get bonus points for having more experience, which gives them a better shot at getting that permanent visa. So if students don't get into that permanent visa system that way, then they may look at getting employers to sponsor them through a 482 visa. So through the 482, an employer can then sponsor a student or an applicant to work for them for a certain period of time. And then within that visa structure, you've got different occupation lists or different skilled occupations that come into that in terms of whether or not the employer is able to hire someone into that particular category of occupation. So the government every year, every few years, will refine that occupation list to try and get those occupations that they think are in demand or in a shortage of workers in Australia, so that they can target those people to try and get them to either migrate to Australia or remain in Australia if they're here, to continue working for Australian companies and Australian employers. So that's a summary of the different visa types.
That's a really great overview. There's probably a couple of questions on that one, just if I can pick up on a few things that you said there. I think the one thing that information has just highlighted is that you've debunked the idea that everybody that takes on an international student needs to go through that skilled sponsorship process. So just to confirm, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's so many other options to get to before that is even an option for you to sponsor a student.
Yeah, that's right, Anu. So basically, if you're dealing with graduate students and they get a 485 visa, the onus and obligation for ensuring that they have the work rights is on the student. So there's no onus or no obligation on an employer to do anything other than hire the actual individual. So all the responsibility for visas is on the shoulder of the students or of the visa applicant. So an employer can freely hire anyone they wish, knowing that if for whatever reason the visa doesn't work out, there's no penalty on the employer. Obviously, in that unfortunate situation, the student wouldn't be able to work unless they could get some other type of visa to remain in Australia. But there's no penalty on an employer for not helping the student per se to get that visa. So the students have full responsibility for that. And then
is that all the way through, Imran? Like all the way through the process until they become a PR or a citizen?
Well, it's all the way through, unless the employer wants to assist them with an employer-sponsored visa. So if an employer is prepared to help someone out who is not able to qualify or meet the criteria for a permanent residency visa, then the employer can put their hand up and say, well, yes, I will help you out and I'm prepared to sponsor you and help the student get, or a visa applicant get one of the employer-sponsored visas, but there's no obligation on any employer to do that. An employer would normally only do that if they were unable to recruit any local residents and they had a skill shortage that they wanted to fill, and they feel that they could fill that position from overseas graduates or overseas experienced candidates who can then fill that position for them. But there's no obligation on an employer to go down that track.
Yeah, that's fantastic to know, actually. And with the other visa, where you said it's more like a job application, the students that I work with are really switched on. They're very proactive. Students that transfer to a different country to complete their degree, they're definitely forward thinking. They're making plans all the time. So with that collation of experiences and skills that will boost them up the line, are they actually accumulating that all the way through their studies, or does that only start once they start work?
No, so they can accumulate that through their studies. So this method of accumulating points or skills for the permanent residency pathway, there's different things that students will do so they can try and improve their English skills whilst they're doing their studies, and also try and get other work experience whilst doing their studies. So the end game for most students is to maximise their points to get the best chance of getting an offer from the government for a permanent residency visa.
And they're smart, they know that, and that's why they do generalizing, but that's why a lot of students do look at those regional placements or other opportunities such as the internship scheme, which boosts up their skill points as well. Not sure if that's the right term, but they are really proactive in doing those sort of things. The other thing that I was just going to ask about is bridging visas are often talked about. So where do bridging visas sit, and what happens in terms of your employment rights when you're on a bridging visa?
Excellent question. So bridging visas are basically an interim visa or a sort of a gap stop for people who have applied for another visa and they're waiting for that visa to be decided. So to remain in Australia, you have to have a visa. So if someone has, for example, a student visa and they've applied for a 485 graduate visa, but the 485 visa hasn't been decided yet, once their student visa expires, they will automatically, in most cases, transition onto a bridging visa. And then that bridging visa allows them to remain lawfully in Australia while they're waiting for their substantive visa application to be decided. So whilst they're on that bridging visa, they normally would get the same work rights that they had on the previous visa they were on.
Okay.
If they were, for example, on a student visa, then student visas allow them to work full-time outside of study times or study sessions. So you would assume that most students would have graduated. So because they're not studying, they would have the capability of working full-time on that bridging visa until the 485 visas are decided.
Okay, awesome. And I guess that last bit brings me to my next question about what sort of rights do students have while they're still completing their degree. We've probably got quite a few people on the call who are in early career space, so looking at interns, vacation programs and graduate programs as well. What are the working rights of a student who's still currently studying?
Yeah, so students who are still studying, whilst sessions in play and studies are happening, they normally would have a restriction of only being able to work a maximum 40 hours a fortnight. But during session breaks, there's unlimited work rights. So during your Christmas holiday break, where normally, unless they're doing summer session, most students would have that time off, so they can then work full time in any capacity whatsoever with any employers.
In terms of time, like processing times and things like that, for when somebody is changing visas, is there a really big delay? Like how long do those sort of processes take?
Yeah, good question. The government advertises your sort of processing times on their website.
Mm-hmm. And that's the Foreign Home Affairs one?
Yeah, so the Home Affairs website, they give sort of estimated timeframes for processing of different visas. So they'll say, we expect to process 70% of visas within X amount of time and 80% of visas within this period, 90%, etc. But with COVID, everything's blown out. So the timeframes for a lot of visas have become substantially longer. So if a student is sort of in that timeframe where they're getting close to their visa expiring, they would already, you would assume, have started the process or taken steps to renew their visa or get some other type of visa for them. And also for employers, if you are looking to go down that track once you've hired someone and their 485 visa is expiring, and it'd be good for an employer to have an open line of communication with the employee to say, look, where do you see yourself going visa-wise? And do you need some assistance? And if an employer is prepared to sponsor them, they would need to start that process before the visa expires. So normally you'd want to leave a 6-month buffer or a gap before the visa expires, because there's certain things an employer will have to do on their end before they're even eligible to sponsor an employee for one of those employer-sponsored visas.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's probably just part of people's succession planning anyway. So it doesn't sound completely unreasonable to sort of factor in those timeframes, especially if you know where your employers are sitting with their working rights and their visas. There's a couple of questions that have just come into the chat. So how long is the process from graduate visa to permanent residency?
How long's a piece of string?
there could be a lot of bumps in that one.
Yeah, look, I mean, it just depends. Each person is unique and different. Some people may go from graduate visa and they may get a PR straight away because they've got enough points so that if they've applied for a 189 permanent residency visa and in the monthly rounds that happen, they get an offer very quickly because they've got high points. Other people might be waiting a long period of time, and other people may never get offered a permanent visa through that channel, so they'll have to look at other options such as the employer-sponsored or regional work pathways to try and get permanent residency visa that way. So there's no sort of fixed or definite time frame. It just depends on each particular person. But I guess employers can. So I was just going to say, employers can be assured that if an employee does get a 485 visa, then they've got them locked in for at least 2 years to be able to work there, and possibly longer if they're a master's or a PhD graduate as well.
Would it be, so in terms of the host organisation, like the actual employer, are there things that they can be doing that would assist in that process? So can they be, you know, supporting those activities to boost them up that line, or is there anything else that they can be doing to support the employee?
Not really, other than obviously giving them work, because once you're in the workplace, then it goes on how many years of work experience you have. So the longer you've got, the longer number of years of experience you've got, the more points you will get for that criteria. So basically, the onus again falls on the employee or the student to try and improve their own prospects in terms of trying to improve their English, because English is a big thing. The higher their English level, the more points you get for that criteria for that as well.
Okay, all right, fantastic, thank you. There's another question saying the government is now giving students permission to work 40 hours a week. Do we know when this will end?
No, we don't. So that was brought in during COVID times when there was a shortage of people working in supermarkets and other areas of work. So they had initially sort of targeted that to nursing homes and home care and supermarkets where there was a shortage of people working. So I'm not aware that there's sort of a deadline has been put in for that. But I mean, if you're looking to hire a graduate, then they would no longer be on a student visa anyway, so that wouldn't be applicable to them.
Okay. And it would be good to get more information on the 491 visa class as well. So we're getting more candidates who have applied for this as well, which are being now processed.
So the 491 visa, I think at the end of the slides that Grant's going to hand out, there's a little bit more detailed information that I've prepared on each of the particular visa classes. So the 491 is a visa that gives a direct option to a permanent residency, but that's only for regional areas. So the applicant has to live and work in a regional area. So like I was saying before, the government's trying to target to get more people into regional areas, and they've made it easier for them to get a pathway into permanent residency that way. So,
and there's a lot of value in that too, isn't there? About you know, offering a different community for an international student. They've come over to Australia and they are looking to settle and to make their own community. So regional areas are a great option. So we will pop in once this video is finished, we'll pop in the appendix, and there's a lot of information in there that Imran has provided on other visas. Also, there is, I think there's the link to the Vivo checker as well. Imran, can you talk a little bit about that?
There should be a link to that. So just to fill everyone in on what Vivo is basically a system set up by the government through their website where people can go and search on a particular visa applicant or a particular person, their visa status. So particularly for employers, to make sure that they're hiring someone who does have the appropriate work rights, so they can go and do a search on that individual's current visa status to determine whether or not they do have work rights to be able to work for that particular employer. I guess one thing to keep in mind though, if you're looking to hire graduates, is when you're doing the recruitment process, many of the students will still be on student visas if they're doing their final year studies. So that Vivo search won't reflect the other visas that they may be eligible for or may look to apply once they've completed their studies and their student visa expires.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. Just before I do pass it back to Grant, I'm just going to quickly check that we've got it all covered in terms of the onus is always on the person on the visa. It's not on the organisation, although there are some proactive and lovely steps that you can take to support that candidate. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So the onus is always on the student or the employee to maintain their visa status, to make sure that they do have the correct work rights to be able to remain in Australia and continue working. If for whatever reason those rights lapse, an employer normally won't be held accountable unless they have notice of that situation by the government, and they failed to do anything to rectify that in terms of either getting the person to get their visa situation rectified or cease employing them. But otherwise, all the onus is on the students or the employees to maintain their visa status.
Okay, wonderful. And the last thing, just to make sure that everybody understands, is that hiring an international student from a student visa and then going into that graduate visa is a high probability. We're not guaranteeing anything, but it's a high probability. And again, the work rights there. So you're looking at hiring somebody who's going to have work rights for at least 2 years, which, sort of is a great outcome considering how long people tend to stay in jobs anyway. So thank you so much for your help, Imran. You've been really, really insightful. There is a slide that I'll get Grant to pop up now with Imran's details just on if you are needing some advice or some support. He obviously is very knowledgeable about his area, very approachable. So I do encourage everybody to reach out if you do have any further questions to Imran. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Anu.
And Grant, I'll pass back over to you.
Thanks, Anu and Imran. That was fantastic. And we didn't get to every question. So what I might do, Imran, if possible, obviously the employers have got your contact details there, but I might even compile a little FAQ list as well. And if you have a chance to pop in some short answers there, and I can send it out as part of the slide deck, because there's many questions coming through.
Yeah, one thing's just come through. Someone's asked, how do we access Vivo? So the spelling, it's VEVO. So if you do a search on that through Google, it'll come up with the website. And then from there, you just fill in the details, and you can then do a search using the visa details from the applicant.
Spot on. Thanks so much, Imran. All right, so next up, we've got an employer panel, as promised. So we've got a bit of an all-star cast here. So I've got Stephen Neild, who's a graduate recruitment lead at GHD in Melbourne. Sonali Bedge, she's a talent acquisition manager at Tata Consultancy Services in Sydney. And also Simon Gibson, program manager at APM Group in Brisbane as well. So maybe Simon, if you want to kick off first.
Grant, thanks for having us. I'm Simon Gibson. I'm the graduate program manager for the APM Group. We're a national allied health organisation with locations all over Australia.
Thanks, Simon. Sonali?
Hey, hi everyone. I'm Sonali Bedge. I'm working with Tata Consultancy Group for over a year now. I predominantly take care of lateral recruitment along with the grad hiring space here. So lovely to meet you all. Look forward for speaking to you.
Thanks, Sonali. Lovely to have you on as well. And last but certainly not least, Steve.
Hi everyone. So Steve, I'm the grad program lead for GHD. Been in and around the grad industry for a little while now. I think it's about 12 years now, mostly within, I guess, the engineering and consulting sector.
So a couple of questions from me just to get started, but please feel free, everyone that's online, to jump into the chat starting asking those questions as well. Some may pop up, but I'll get to them as we go, and we can have a bit of a fireside chat here. So to kick things off, why does your organisation, I might turn to you first, Sonali. Why does your organisation actually hire international students?
Yes, definitely. So we are a large size organization having close to 5,000 folks working in this region. So when we are hiring on a large numbers, hiring graduate student is the prime importance to us. So not only local and citizens, but at the same time, having international students coming from different countries is quite important to us. So two major reasons. One is definitely diversity. And secondly, the growth aspect of it. So when I say diversity is not only the gender diversity is which we are mindful of, but at the same time, we are looking for people coming with different culture, different experiences. So most of the time, international students also carry some experience with them. Right. So having a local experience in their countries, dealing with their clienteles, it becomes really important for us when we are servicing the similar set of customers from here. And at the same time, when we are targeting a growth from our business point of view. So that makes really important for us to, have graduates onboarded.
Thanks for sharing. And Steve, what about yourself? What is when it comes to recruiting international students, What does the process look like from your end as a recruiter?
Look, the process is very similar to what we would put any other student through, right up until the point where we decide that we'd like to make them an offer. So at that point, what we would do is, I guess, similar to what Imran was saying, we actually do a bit of a check on what their current visa status is. I mean, we do ask them to disclose that through the application process, but it's always good just to do a little bit of a sanity check right at the end. If they're on a 500 student visa or they're on a bridging visa, we would generally offer them an 18-month fixed term contract. We kind of set 18 months as a bit of a catch, just in case they got a shorter length visa, which is rarer. But generally just means that we get a warning in our HR system that someone's going to terminate before their visa is due to expire. If they're currently already on a 485 visa, we check the end date and then again offer them a fixed term contract that then will end in line with their visa conditions. The other change then is that if they're on their 500 visa or they're on a bridging visa type A, once they secure their 485 temporary residence visa, we would then change the end date of their fixed term contract internally to then align with that visa condition. And then if they get permanent residency, we don't guarantee a permanent position at that point legally for a couple of reasons. One being, when they get it, we may be going through a restructuring process or the economy might be in a different shape, and we might be going through redundancies. So we don't legally say that, yes, we will guarantee it, but we always say that we will certainly have a conversation at that point.
Fantastic. That's great insight. And yourself, Simon, in terms of the recruitment process at APM Group, does that differ a lot to what Steve said, or is there any alternations on that?
No, look, the physical recruitment process itself is the same. For international or domestic, there's no difference in there. Look, we've hired international students on permanent ongoing contracts. With the caveat being that you have to maintain full working rights in order to maintain that, which is the same for anybody. So I think, as Imran said before, the onus is on that individual to maintain those rights. We need to make sure internally that we've got the right checks and balances in place, that we're sort of stepping in and say, okay, so if you're on a 485, when does that expire? Let's have a chat 6 months out, 3 months out. What are your plans? What are you thinking? And work together with that individual to make sure that if everything's going well from a general performance perspective, we're doing what we can to make sure that person can stay and sort of move on to the next visa or onto a PR situation.
Yeah. And just staying with you, Simon, when you started recruiting international students, was there, I guess, any challenges or blockers faced internally? Was it educating the business, or was it pretty smooth sailing?
Look, it's an interesting one. It hadn't really been brought up when I came on, yes, which has just gone a year. But from that time, there's a strong desire to look at international students. I think, sort of similar to what Snarley was saying, people see the value in that diversity, the value people being able to bring, different ideas and perspectives to the workplace. And we work with a really diverse range of individuals throughout our work cares and our pediatrics. So it's very wholeheartedly embraced. And I know from an experience type perspective, we've got teams just sourcing international people to bring in. So this is outside of the grad program, so it is quite different. But we've got teams doing that, full time, because it's such a big piece of work for us at this stage.
Thanks, Simon. And Sonali, in terms of yourself at TCS, is this a new thing that you've started recruiting international students, or has this been in place for some time?
No, we have been doing so far. We always welcome international students. But to be very frank with you, since this pandemic hit us, and we landed ourselves in scarcity of talent that we are looking for. Since then, our focus has definitely changed. And our numbers have gone up for hiring international students. Interesting.
And is there any, have you faced any challenges at your organisation in terms of recruiting international students?
Definitely. So as Steve was mentioning, doing a check on their visa status and work right conditions is the real important thing that we do. And that's where, we have certain org guidelines which we need to adhere to. So if someone is on 500 visa, we may not be able to hire them directly for the full-time role, right? So we have to do the screening accordingly and only consider applications who are already on PR or who are maybe on a bridging visa. So getting the right set of profiles with the right work conditions is the important, and that's where I think we struggle a lot. Another challenge is again, adhering to their continuous work right conditions. So what we typically land ourselves into is offering them a 1-year fixed term contract. Again, as Imran was saying, the rights are with the employers to have full working rights all the time. But again, we feel it's our responsibility as well. They hold the rights dutifully throughout their tenure. So keeping regular checks with them, getting into regular conversations is another additional task that we have to do, especially when we are hiring international students.
Yeah, I follow. Thanks, Sonali. And maybe just an open question for the panel, and a quick reminder actually before I go into this, please feel free to ask any questions in the chat. I'll get to them as soon as possible. I can see a couple coming through. But an open question to the panel, does anyone use an immigration lawyer, whether it's internally or externally, to help you through maneuver through this process, or is that not used at all?
Look, not at the grad level. Couldn't speak for the experienced hire team, but not at the grad level, no.
Yeah, so not at grad experienced hire, yes. We do. We engage a third party to kind of help us through what is a more complicated visa sponsorship process, but no, not at the grad level at the moment.
Same with us.
Thanks, guys. So we often see that, I think all of you have been at career fairs, maybe not so much over the last couple of years, although they're coming back online of late, which is fantastic to see. By online, I mean actually out on campus and seeing people face to face for the first time in a year and a half, dusting off the career fair banners and that. And when we're at these career fairs as Grad Australia or Prosple, we always see international students really engaged in their careers and turn out in huge numbers and that. And I'm curious to ask the panel if you see that that energy and enthusiasm also roll over into their work. Maybe Steve, I can throw that one to you initially.
Yeah, sure. To be fair, very much so. And again, look, obviously speaking for my experience at GHD, but then with my former employer as well, we tended to find that there seemed to be, I don't know whether a gratefulness is the right word, but there always seemed to be a very strong alignment with the business that actually gave them an opportunity. Talking to many employers in this space over many years, there aren't too many that actively look to hire international students as they're studying, as opposed to waiting for them to get their temporary residence visa and then allowing them to apply. So I think given that it still is a relatively small subset, they tend to put a lot more into it. And maybe part of that is because you're the company that gave them a shot and they're very grateful and feel very aligned with the business and the brand. The other component, to draw a bit of a parallel, may also be that knowing that there are other limited opportunities for them to look for other forms of work until they get their permanent residency, maybe they feel a little bit of extra pressure to perform and ensure that they are doing the best that they can, because if they failed their probation or they were terminated from a performance perspective, the next step would then become harder for them than it would be for a citizen.
Really interesting. What about yourself, Simon or Sonali? Anything else to add on that front?
Yeah, but not from an APM perspective, and I'll just caveat that because it's too new. If I think back to EY, Ernst & Young, we would take international students, and I could think, again, similar to what Steve said, very much a case of putting in 110%, which most of the people did anyway, which is great. I think where we can see the benefit in that was, and this obviously only applies to, so I guess your multinational organizations, but I know we had instances where someone would join us and they might stay in the Australian business for a couple of years, for whatever reason, perhaps their visa expired and whatever to get a new one, or they wanted to, they'll then transfer back to their home country, but with the company. So, you still get you're retaining that employee within the business. It's a good news story from that perspective. You're showing the ability for people to move around. So I think, yes, we saw them come in, work harder than everyone else. I don't want to say that because that would be a disservice to the domestics, but definitely a sense of gratitude and a sense of really getting in and becoming part of the culture very, very quickly, which is amazing to see.
Yeah.
Right,
And
I agree to both of them, because their energy levels are always high, and especially fresh out of universities, coming with different sort of ideas. So that really helps, and especially when we are running different programs and different practices, wherein we want our employees to take up new skills. That's where becomes important, to align students over there. And at the same time, I also feel that, since they're coming here and trying to settle in new culture, new territory altogether, you will find always more flexibility coming in from them. It's not only related to asking them to work for over the weekends or maybe putting some extra hours, not on those aspects, but eventually, I mean, predominantly they're quite flexible. They are ready to learn new skills. They are ready to learn your culture, really into it, really be interested in different programs that we run. So yeah, you can really differentiate the between the earlier groups and the fresh groups.
That's great to hear. And one of the like the elephants in the room per se when recruiting students, international students, I should say, is that, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit in terms of the length of tenure. They often feel, employers, when I speak with them, they often feel like they might get the visa and leave or whatnot. So I'm keen to ask the panel, do you measure that in terms of length of tenure amongst international students compared with domestic, and does it differ at all?
Sometimes yes, and after COVID again we have seen that rate has going up. From students' perspective, again, one they see is they tend to go with the employer who will give them some sort of assurance in terms of sponsorship. There are many employers in the market who also sponsor their permanent residency, so that becomes very much lucrative for them to leave current organization. Second one is that also when companies like us giving them fixed term contracts, so they always weigh their options, what is out in market. If they're going ahead getting a permanent role with a good number of some salary, then obviously they tend to pick up those roles and not stick to your organization, even though they feel culture is right, environment is right. They tend to leave for these aspects particularly.
Got it. Thanks, Sonali. What about yourself, Simon or Steve? Any differences between tenure amongst domestic and international students?
So probably similar to Simon, the GHD journey with international students really only started last year for us when we built the grad function here. But with Oricon, so my previous employer, we had hired, it's never a huge volume of international students each year, but there was generally some through that process. I think most of them are actually still there. Some have gone on to some very senior leadership positions now as well within the organization. They were always the candidates that I would then point to if a hiring manager was ever, had questions or concerns or, potentially resistant to the idea. You would always have the couple within the business that you could point to say, they're some of our success stories. Wouldn't it be great for you to have one within your team as well? So it was always good to then have those ones that you could point at to say, yep, they're the business case for keep doing this.
Yeah, the why. Just point to the leaders within
Yes.
the business. Exactly. It's a lot easier when you've got that business case. Guys, it seems like we're out of time, so let's maybe leave it there. Unless, Anu, was there any quick fire questions in the chat we could slip in?
No, not really. I've tried to link in any resources that I can. I know Imran had to jump off. He had a pressing engagement, but there's a couple of technical ones there that are well over my head, so we'll try to get the answer from Imran and get those across. But I think we're pretty much covered there. But I did want to say thanks to everybody for coming. It's really, from a student point of view, and the students that we work with at UAW, they really are the most engaged students, because I suppose that, we try really hard, as most universities would, to develop what we call a T-shaped graduate, so that they've got this, deep-seated industry-specific knowledge, which is coming from their degree, but all of these other transferable skills that employers say over and over again that they need, the communication, collaboration, all of those types of skills. And you'll find that students that are willing to actually pack up and change countries and make new networks and all of the things that come with being an international student really make a really strong T-shaped graduate that could really make a really big difference to your organisation. So I do encourage everybody to have a think about it. And if you would like to see any wonderful students, there's universities all over the country that have them. And I'm sure that we'd all be more than happy to talk to you about it.
Thanks, Anu. And once again, big thank you to the panel, Simon, Sonali and Stephen as well, for taking time out of your day and sharing your expertise and a little bit of the ins and outs on how your organisations, I should say, hire international students. So much appreciated. Thanks for your time and insight today.
No worries, great. Thanks for having us.
It was lovely to be part of it.
No worries. So we'll wrap up there. A quick plug about Prosple for those who don't know who we are and what we do. I maybe should have covered this off initially. So we power a number of job boards across Australia, New Zealand and Southeast Asia. So we work with many employers such as yourself. I can see a lot of our clients are online today. And in terms of helping you attract interns and graduates via our job boards. So here's a list of many employers that we partner with. And if you want to get in touch to find out some more information, feel free to do so. There's a QR code. I checked it beforehand, so it should work. Just hover your little phone camera across there and it should pop up, and you plug in your details and we'll book you in for a time to catch up with one of our graduate recruitment specialists to ensure that you're getting the applications that you need for your grad and intern campaigns. So that's it from us. Again, thank you so much for coming and for all your amazing questions as well in the chat. And sorry we didn't get to all of them. It sounds like you said, I know that there was a few sort of very technical sort of questions that Imran could have covered off. So feel free to send me an email or get in touch with your Prosple attraction consultants, so Elliot and Jeremy and the team. Get in touch with them and we can fire those questions across to Imran as well. After this session, we'll be sharing the recording and the slide deck, which has got his contact information and also some additional slides which walk through the Vivo search and a few of the nuances of the different visas as well. So let's wrap it up there. Again, thanks everyone for your time. Enjoy the rest of your week.